Sexual arousal is one of the most fundamental and deeply rooted physiological and psychological responses in the human body, but its significance reaches far beyond reproduction or momentary pleasure. In fact, sexual arousal is a window, a powerful lens into the health of the brain, the state of your neurochemical balance, and the overall condition of your mental and emotional well-being. I want to be clear about this from the start. Sexual arousal is not just about sex. It is about motivation, it is about desire, it is about drive, connection, emotion, and even survival. It activates neural circuits that overlap with those involved in learning, focus, memory, and emotional resilience. So when we talk about sexual arousal, what we're really talking about is the activation of the nervous system in a way that reflects and affects mental health. Now, I want you to imagine your brain as a symphony of signals. Chemical messengers, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, norepinephrine, and others are constantly adjusting the volume of different emotional and cognitive experiences. When someone experiences sexual arousal, there is a symphony of activation. The limbic system, hypothalamus, prefrontal cortex, and even the spinal cord light up in synchronized waves. But what's fascinating, and what many people don't realize, is that this response doesn't only emerge from physical stimulation. It can be triggered purely by thought, by memory, by fantasy, by connection, by safety. That means that your emotional state, your past experiences, your belief systems, and especially your mental health play a massive role in how and even whether you experience sexual arousal. Let's talk about dopamine. Dopamine is the molecule of motivation. It fuels desire, pursuit, and reward anticipation. When you feel attracted to someone, when you desire connection, when you fantasize or engage in intimacy, dopamine is surging. But here's the interesting part. The same dopamine circuits that drive sexual arousal also govern your ability to feel joy, hope, and enthusiasm in everyday life. So if someone is struggling with depression or burnout or anxiety, what happens? Those same dopamine circuits can become underactive or dysregulated. This is why so many people with mental health challenges also report low libido, difficulty experiencing arousal, or a sense of disconnection from themselves and their partners. This is not a sign of weakness. It is not in your head, in the way people dismiss things. It is literally in your head. It is in your neurochemistry, in your neural wiring, and in the patterns that your brain is currently running based on your mental and physical state. One of the most powerful demonstrations of this connection is what we see in PTSD and trauma survivors. Many individuals with trauma history have difficulty with arousal. Why? Because the brain regions that should associate touch, intimacy, and connection with safety and pleasure have become wired often unconsciously to associate them with threat, shame, or vulnerability. Sexual arousal, in such cases, is not suppressed by choice. It is being actively inhibited by survival circuitry. The amygdala, a region involved in fear and threat detection, overpowers the natural reward circuits. This is the body trying to protect itself, and it is why trauma, informed therapy, and healing are so crucial, because only by reteaching the nervous system that intimacy is safe, that connection is nourishing, can arousal return in a healthy, empowered way. Now, on the other side of the coin, let's explore how healthy sexual arousal can actually promote mental health. One of the best studied effects of sexual arousal and orgasm is the increase in oxytocin, sometimes called the cuddle hormone or bonding molecule. Oxytocin promotes feelings of trust, calm, and closeness. It also reduces cortisol, your primary stress hormone. So sexual activity, in the context of safety and mutual respect, acts like an antidepressant and anxiolytic, a stress relief mechanism built into our biology. In addition, we know that the default mode network, a brain network associated with self, criticism, rumination, and overthinking, becomes less active during sexual arousal and orgasm. This quieting of internal noise can have profound psychological benefits. It's not just about pleasure, it's about silencing the part of your brain that tells you you're not good enough, not lovable, not safe. So let's summarize what we know so far. Sexual arousal is a deeply neural process. It is a neurochemical event that reflects the state of your motivation, your safety, your emotional readiness. It can be suppressed by trauma, stress, anxiety, or depression, but it can also be restored and even used as a way to rebalance your mental health. Let's talk about anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure. Many people who experience this symptom during depressive episodes report not only a loss of interest in daily life, but also in sexual intimacy. Again, this reflects a dopaminergic system under stress. When the brain no longer expects reward, it stops releasing dopamine in anticipation. This is like a motivational circuit shutting down, but this isn't permanent. Neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to rewire, means that with the right inputs, with therapy, mindfulness, exercise, connection, even exposure to sunlight and rhythm, we can retrain those reward pathways. We can bring desire back online, not just sexual desire, but the desire to live, to feel, to connect, to hope. I want to address something important here: medications. Many people take antidepressants, especially SRIs, which can blunt sexual arousal. This is a known side effect, but what's essential to understand is that untreated depression can also suppress libido and arousal. So it's about balance, working with your healthcare provider to monitor, adjust, and support your mental health holistically. Sometimes just knowing that your brain is still capable of arousal, that those circuits are still alive beneath the fog, can be incredibly healing. Sexual arousal, even in thought or fantasy, can be a sign of recovery. A sign that the brain is starting to believe again in pleasure, in possibility, in connection, and that brings us to an often overlooked piece: imagination. Sexual arousal doesn't require another person. It requires imagination, attention, and permission. It's a form of embodied storytelling. When you imagine someone who makes you feel safe and desired, your brain responds almost identically to real interaction. This is why guided imagery, fantasy, and mindful self-connection can be powerful tools in mental health recovery. Sexual arousal, at its core, is a developmental experience. It doesn't just appear at puberty. Its roots are formed far earlier, in the earliest interactions a child has with caregivers, with safety, with closeness. Whether or not someone felt nurtured, emotionally attuned to, physically safe, and seen in their formative years directly affects their adult capacity for intimacy, trust, and embodied desire. When a child receives consistent affection, attunement, and emotional responsiveness, the brain wires to associate closeness with safety. This secure attachment is the foundation of healthy sexual expression later in life. But when a child experiences neglect, chaos, abuse, or emotional unpredictability, a different pattern is formed. The nervous system wires to protect, not connect. It prioritizes vigilance over vulnerability. In neuroscience, this is known as attachment programming, and it directly shapes the autonomic nervous system. The vagus nerve, for example, which plays a central role in parasympathetic calming and arousal readiness, is either supported by safe early relationships or becomes dysregulated by instability. That dysregulation manifests later as difficulty relaxing into intimacy, mistrust in romantic bonds, and even disembodiment from one's own arousal signals. Many adults don't realize that their low libido, hypersexual behavior, or struggle with arousal is not about their current partner or situation. It's about their nervous system running an old script, written by childhood experience and reinforced by years of unconscious belief. These beliefs: I'm not safe when close to someone, my needs don't matter, I'll be hurt if I let go, are stored in the body, not just the mind. But the good news, and this is where neuroscience gives hope, is that these patterns can change. Through neuroplasticity, through emotional co-regulation, through safe and healthy relationships, and through somatic therapy, the brain can unlearn these defensive strategies and rewire new circuits of safety, presence, and connection. This rewiring isn't just mental, it's physical. It changes the firing patterns of neurons in the insula, amygdala, and medial prefrontal cortex areas deeply involved in emotional awareness, fear modulation, and arousal. For example, when someone learns to experience non-sexual touch as safe and comforting, the brain's alarm circuits quiet down, oxytocin levels rise, cortisol drops, the same circuits that were once activated in defense begin to fire in resonance and openness. Over time, these small shifts translate into a restored capacity for sexual arousal, not based on fear or performance, but on genuine embodied presence. Let's take it even deeper. The influence of childhood experiences doesn't stop at the emotional level, it also shapes hormonal development. Stress in early life alters the hypothalamic, pituitary, adrenal HPA axis, the very system that governs stress hormones like cortisol and sex hormones like testosterone and estrogen. Dysregulation in this system can lead to blunted arousal responses, irregular desire cycles, and even reproductive health issues. This is not just theoretical, it is measurable. We now have studies showing that individuals with high levels of early life stress exhibit lower baseline levels of dopamine responsiveness in key brain areas involved in reward and pleasure. What does this mean? It means the brain learns early on to expect less reward, and so it delivers less excitement, even in the presence of stimuli that should be arousing. This explains why some people can go through the motions of sexual interaction and feel nothing. It's not a lack of desire, it's a brain wired to not expect joy. But again, awareness changes everything. Once someone understands this, they stop blaming themselves, they stop wondering what's wrong with me, and instead begin asking what happened to me and how can I heal it. That shift from shame to science is one of the most empowering transitions a person can make. Another deeply influential factor in this domain is cultural messaging, particularly shame, religious repression, and societal double standards. Many people were raised in environments where sexual desire was framed as dirty, dangerous, or forbidden. These early teachings become internalized and embedded in neural patterns. So even as adults, people may consciously want to enjoy intimacy, but subconsciously feel guilt, fear, or even self-disgust when arousal arises. This creates an inner conflict. The prefrontal cortex says yes, but the limbic system screams no. And in that disconnect, arousal short circuits. The brain is a meaning-making machine. If it has been conditioned to associate arousal with danger, it will not fully allow the body to enter into that experience. Even in the absence of real external threat, internalized scripts can suppress natural, healthy responses. For example, someone raised in a religiously conservative or emotionally rigid household might experience arousal and immediately feel shame. This shame triggers stress hormones. Stress then suppresses sexual function, lowering testosterone, narrowing blood flow, and increasing muscle tension. The result, arousal is lost. Again, the cycle reinforces itself. The person believes, "I'm broken," when in fact, their brain is simply following a deeply ingrained but outdated program, and it goes further. These experiences often intersect with gender identity, orientation, and sexual preference. Many individuals in the LGBTQ+ community, for example, grow up receiving messages that their natural desires are wrong or abnormal. This creates intense neural dissonance. The brain's reward circuits light up in response to a thought or image, and simultaneously, the fear and guilt centers activate, shutting down that arousal. Over time, this wiring can lead to anxiety, depression, and even dissociation. The body learns that it's not safe to feel what it naturally feels, and yet, the core truth remains, these responses are biologically valid. The orientation of your arousal is not a pathology, the shame and suppression placed on it is. When the brain is supported in self-acceptance, identity alignment, and emotional safety, these circuits can fire fully and freely again. One of the most powerful interventions in these cases is affirmation, not just externally, but internally. When someone tells themselves it's okay to feel this, the brain hears it, the insula, which maps internal states, becomes more active, the anterior cingulate cortex, involved in emotional regulation, calms the noise. Neuroplastic change begins not with medication or surgery, but with acceptance, compassion, and permission. This is why therapy, particularly body-based or somatic therapy, can be so transformative. It allows people to come back into their own bodies, to feel without fear, and to integrate arousal as a natural, healthy, life-affirming force. And when that happens, when someone reclaims their capacity to feel fully, freely, and safely, it changes their entire relationship with life. They become more creative, more joyful, more motivated, and more connected. Because in the end, sexual arousal is not separate from mental health. It is a reflection of it. Arousal is a signal. It tells us whether we feel safe, whether we feel whole, whether we believe in our right to experience pleasure and connection. And when we listen to it not as a demand, but as information, we begin to heal the deepest parts of ourselves. Sexual identity and orientation are among the most neurologically misunderstood, yet biologically rich aspects of the human experience. From a scientific standpoint, these aren't just cultural or psychological constructs, they are deeply rooted in brain development, neurochemistry, and hormonal signaling. Understanding the neurobiological underpinnings of sexual identity helps to not only destigmatize diversity in sexual expression, but also to bring much-needed clarity to the link between mental health and lived authenticity. From a mental perspective, certain brain regions show structural and functional differences that correlate with sexual orientation and gender identity. The hypothalamus, for instance, is a key player. Specifically, a region within it known as the NA3 has been shown in numerous studies to differ in size and neural density between heterosexual and homosexual individuals. These findings are not judgments, they are reflections of natural variation in the brain, shaped by genetics, hormone exposure in the womb, and early neural imprinting. What's critical to understand is this: these neural differences are not diseases or deficits. They are natural manifestations of biological diversity, and when someone is forced to suppress, deny, or camouflage their innate sexual identity, the brain's stress response activates. The result is chronic activation of the amygdala, the brain's fear center, leading to persistent anxiety, hypervigilance, and even depression. When someone is told, overtly or subtly, that their orientation is wrong, the insular cortex, which maps interoception and internal experience, begins to disconnect. This disconnection can manifest as dissociation, difficulty accessing bodily sensations of arousal, or a deep sense of being out of sync with oneself. Over time, the default mode network, the brain system involved in self-referential thought, can become hijacked by intrusive thoughts, self-criticism, and shame-based rumination. But when sexual identity is affirmed both internally and externally, the brain responds with resilience. Oxytocin levels increase, which fosters trust and emotional regulation. The anterior cingulate cortex begins to integrate positive emotional feedback. Even the striatum, the brain's pleasure hub, lights up in greater synchrony with signals of self-acceptance. Simply put, when people are supported in expressing who they truly are, the brain works better, it regulates emotions better, it processes reward more efficiently, it builds more durable mental health. Research has shown that individuals who are allowed to live in congruence with their gender identity and who experience social affirmation of their orientation show lower rates of depression, anxiety, substance abuse, and even suicidality. Not because their brain chemistry changed in isolation, but because the environment stopped attacking their neurobiology. That's the power of psychosocial affirmation on the neurological level. This relationship is especially pronounced in adolescence. During puberty, the brain undergoes massive remodeling, synaptic pruning, hormonal cascades, and increased plasticity all converge. It is during this time that many individuals become acutely aware of their sexual orientation or identity. But if this awareness is met with fear, judgment, or ridicule, the stress burden on the brain becomes enormous, and chronic stress during adolescence alters the development of the prefrontal cortex, the very part of the brain responsible for decision making, impulse control, and future planning. This disruption can lead to coping strategies that include substance use, self-harm, or risky sexual behavior, not because of who someone is, but because of how the world treats who they are. The brain, in an effort to protect itself, seeks ways to escape the inner turmoil of suppression and rejection. This is not weakness, it's neurobiology under duress. Now let's look at arousal from the lens of orientation. Arousal patterns are not chosen. They are emergent properties of a complex interplay between genetics, hormone exposure, early experience, and neurochemical wiring, attempts to suppress or correct these patterns through so-called conversion, therapy, or other harmful interventions not only fail but cause profound neural trauma. MRI studies show that individuals who undergo such interventions experience heightened activity in the anterior insula and dorsal ACC areas associated with pain, conflict, and emotional suffering. These interventions teach the brain to associate natural arousal cues with danger. Over time, this miswiring can result in sexual dysfunction, emotional numbness, and even complete avoidance of intimacy. This is neural scarring. This is trauma etched into the brain's circuits. Conversely, when arousal is understood as an invitation to self, understanding not something to be feared, it becomes a source of power. The brain stops resisting its own nature and starts operating in harmony. People report not just greater sexual satisfaction, but more stable moods, clearer thinking, and greater motivation in other areas of life. Why? Because the brain no longer has to spend cognitive and energetic resources on repression. It can redirect those resources to creativity, focus, and growth. It's important to remember that arousal is not strictly genital. It's whole, body, whole, brain. It begins with anticipation, imagination, mirror neuron activation, and even subtle shifts in dopamine and norepinephrine. When someone sees or thinks about a stimulus that aligns with their orientation, the brain doesn't simply light up, it aligns, and alignment is mental health. Alignment is neurointegrity. To deny that is to fracture the self, and the brain knows how to react. When it is fragmented, it enters survival mode. So the solution is not to fight arousal, but to understand it, to listen to it, to let it inform us. Not every thought or image must be acted on, but every thought and image tells us something about our internal map, and maps are meant to be read, not erased. As we allow people and ourselves to understand orientation and identity through a scientific lens rather than a moral one, we open up space for healing. The brain begins to trust itself again. Neuroplasticity is restored. Safe patterns of arousal begin to reinforce themselves. And here's something fascinating. When the brain is in a state of alignment, mirror neurons become more active. These neurons, which allow us to empathize, feel seen, and feel understood, are the foundation of intimacy. They are also the basis of healing in relationships. When people are allowed to be who they are, to arouse and be aroused in ways that are congruent with their biology, the mirror neuron system flourishes. This is what leads to connection. This is what leads to mental health.